So today we're going to be talking about climate change and youth activism. So some of what we'll be discussing is how a ton of different issues intersect with climate change, along with how you as a youth activist can help the cause of environmental justice, even though you may not have the power of a lot of money or the ability to vote. So Audrey, if you can change it to the next slide. So first, we're just going to do introductions. So we can just go down and everyone can introduce themselves from the facilitators today.
I guess I'll go first since I'm at the top. Hello, everyone. I introduced myself already. My name's Audrey, they, them pronouns. Calling in from New Jersey, Hunterdon County. In New Jersey, I've been jumping around. I started with the New Jersey Student Climate Advocates, and then I kind of moved on. I'm now the co-coordinator for Sunrise Hunterdon County, which is a hub of Sunrise Movement, which is a national movement working to stop the climate crisis and create a livable future. I'm also the outreach director for the newly rebranded New Jersey Youth for Climate Action. And that's pretty much like my climate plan right now. I've also done some work with New Jersey Climate Save, though not a whole lot, not as much as I'd like. And I also am an animal rights activist, animal liberation. I'm a vegan activist, so I'm actually the co-director of the New Jersey Animal Rights Coalition, which is like an intergenerational coalition to, help liberate animals and make people aware of the issues surrounding that. So that's pretty much me. I'm super happy to be here, and I'll pass it to Jens.
Hey everyone, so I introduced myself already too. I'm Jens. I'm part of the New Jersey Student Climate Advocates. I serve as the political strategy lead, and our organization is mostly focused on passing a statewide carbon fee and dividend policy that differs from the national policy. And secondly, I'm also part of the Citizens Climate Lobby, which is responsible for passing the national carbon fee and dividend. And I also am involved in the American Civil Liberties Union. And I'll pass it on to Julia.
Hi all, I'm Julia. Like I said, I'm in New Jersey currently, but hopefully soon to be in New York. And I'm a rising freshman in college, hoping to study political science and human rights. So I was the head of local government outreach for New Jersey Student Climate Advocates when we were mainly focused on getting input from stakeholders on our carbon fee policy. And now I'm involved with political strategy and environmental justice. I'm also the executive director of Redefy, an international youth social justice nonprofit that aims to make communities and schools more inclusive and equitable, and mobilize young people to make change kind of locally and where they are. So Harmony.
Hi guys, so I'm Harmony. So I'm just going to be facilitating the discussion between Julia, Jens, and Audrey today. So I'm the advocacy lead for the New Jersey Youth for Climate Action, and I also serve as the social media lead for the New Jersey Student Climate Advocates, which Julia and Jens also are a part of. So we're just going to move on to our first question here. So why is the climate crisis so important? So a lot of people are talking about the climate crisis, especially youth today, but why is it so important that people of many different groups, many different races, people who are activists in different issues, why should they care about the climate crisis?
I can go first if you want. I mean, at face value, the climate crisis is, in my opinion, the largest existential threat to humankind, and especially to our generation as high schoolers and students right now, who will grow up into a future that, may or may not be livable. Currently we ignore the fatal health crises especially in communities of color and in low income communities caused by pollution and climate change. So yeah, and I guess kind of on that note, I think I also view climate change as a proxy for a lot of political issues, and I see fundamentally the battle over the Green New Deal versus fossil fuel profits to be one about our country's values and whether we're going to stand for justice and all human life or for corporations and, the 1%. So obviously our political climate isn't the most stable right now. And I think when it comes to the climate crisis, there is also a larger war being fought at hand that's really about the values that this country stands for.
I guess I'll jump in now. I think right now, we've pretty much gotten to a point in our country where it's no longer is the climate crisis important, but it's more of like all the deniers. There are still deniers out there, unfortunately, and I wish I could just like make them all not deny the climate crisis. But I mean, it's more of an issue. It's more of a question of what do we do about it than is it actually a thing. Most people are now recognizing it as a thing, which is good. And it's thanks to all of the climate strikers in the past few years. The movement started by Greta Thunberg, and the 0 hour marches and all that good stuff. But like, the scary thing is that we have less than 10 years left to actually stop this and make a huge difference before we pass that threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius of global warming. If y'all, the IPCC report said we've got till 2030 to, keep warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius, or else all the issues that have arisen from the climate crisis, like extreme weather, sea level rise, drought and flooding, loss of food shortages, all that's just going to get like really a lot worse if we do pass that threshold. So like the main goal right now is to make change happen before then. And like it's a lot of people say it's so radical to want to stop the climate crisis, but it's like and to want to do all these huge things like implement the Green New Deal, provide a just transition for everyone. But like for decades, it's literally just been the corporations and the billionaires paying off politicians and paying off our leaders to shut their mouths about this. For decades, they've been ignoring it. They haven't been doing anything about it, and it's just now gotten to a point where like it's too much. Like there's no getting around it anymore. Corporate greed is the backbone of our country, and catering to corporations and the 1% and completely ignoring the 99% of other people that live in this country. I think like off what Julia said, like this is like we are young people. I think this is the high school Democrat Summit, so y'all are in high school, and like this is this is our future that we're gonna inherit. Our parents are gonna like grow up and like unfortunately die, and they're not gonna live to see like the changes that they've made. All the older people who are actually causing this stuff, they're just gonna die. They're never gonna have to experience it. But this is our future, and we're just literally going to inherit a broken planet if we don't do anything about the climate crisis. It's like if y'all don't believe in climate change, which really I think all of you Democrats should, but like there's so much information nowadays that it's so important to do something about this before we literally just lose our future. And I'll stop ranting now and let anyone else who wants to speak go ahead.
Yeah, so I think Julia and Audrey hit the main points, but I just want to emphasize the scale of the climate crisis. So just for emphasis, so based on some early reports, we're expecting decreases based on COVID ranging from about 17% to as high as sometimes 30% of this year compared to last year. And we need about 80% reduction by the year 2050 to make sure that these results aren't too harmful. And so you have to imagine that the whole world had to shut down. People weren't driving, people didn't have to go to work, and a lot of the big emissions from transportation and as well as the economy, for example, shutting down, the emissions resulting from that, of course, declined. So this shows that there's definitely some sort of fundamental differences and some fundamental issues at stake that we have to correct, regardless. So it's in the future, we can't make sure that there's drastic change, we have to prevent the drastic consequences associated with them. So it's mostly just talking about the scale of that. And to further build upon, I think, Audrey's point, the current inequities we see now will definitely be exacerbated by climate change in the future, whether it be social justice issues or whether it be through climate refugees or pollution in urban areas, for example. The climate crisis definitely disproportionately impacts people. And to ensure that not only our future is sustainable, but it's also equitable in the future is something that we have to address now. And that's pretty much it. I think Audrey made a good point that we are fighting for our future here. And it's important to make sure that we make these changes now so that our future is livable and also something that we can all share together. And I'll leave it to the next person.
Yeah, definitely. So that was a really good answer to all of those. I think it is important to recognize the magnitude of the effects that the climate crisis will have on tons of different types of activism, which is what we'll be talking about in the next few questions. So Audrey, if you want to switch to the next one, we can connect more about the large effects of climate change on different issues. So how do you guys think that climate change intersects with other issues in our world and other things that especially youth are politically active about?
I can start on this one. So, I mean, Obviously, you guys all probably know about the Black Lives Matter movement right now and all the protests around the country that started in Minnesota with George Floyd. And like everyone was like, "Oh, George Floyd is such a wake up call," but like honestly, it shouldn't be. Like it's not the worst of what's happened, and it's not going to be the worst of what's happened. There's so much injustice that has come before it. Our country is literally built on white supremacy, and it's built on exploiting people of color and people who are not like us, people who aren't white. I mean, I'm white, obviously, like I get that privilege. Like, I don't like it. I don't like that I have more privilege than other people, but it's just a fact. Like I've been growing up with more privilege than a lot of other people. And some people may say that that doesn't really intersect with climate change, but it really does, because in these low-income and minority communities, which are hugely dominated by Black and brown people and other minorities, like the effects of the climate crisis are just going to be that much worse because they don't have the resources to defend against it. They don't have the resources to mitigate these climate impacts. And they are the ones who are not, they're not really contributing to the climate crisis at all. But yet they're the ones who are receiving the most impacts from it. There are so many like instances where like factories are built and toxic waste incinerators are built literally right near huge communities of color, and nothing is really done about that because it's not a white problem. So like no one really cares, which is it's really sad. And you know, it's just a matter of we've been oppressing these communities for so long, and it's about time that we you know, give funding back to them and enable them to actually defeat the climate crisis. Because you know, climate change is it's climate justice, and it affects all social justice issues. It really intertwines with all these issues. It intertwines a lot with racial justice. And then moving on from racial justice, there is another huge issue I want to talk about. Y'all probably heard earlier, I'm a vegan activist, and then something that isn't really talked about a whole lot with climate change is animal agriculture, which is actually a huge factor in the climate crisis. It accounts for 18% of global emissions. A lot of people like to say that that isn't true. They like to like lie and say that like that's not true. It's not true for the U.S., but it is true for the world. And like because the fact is that like animal agriculture uses so many more resources than it does to produce plants. Like think of how much food it takes to feed a cow for like 6 months is about how long their lifespan is in factory farms. Think of all the resources it takes to feed them for that much. And then you're literally only getting like the flesh of their body. Like personally, I don't understand why people enjoy eating the flesh of animals, but you know, I'm not here to rant about animal rights, but I am here to talk about the connection between animal agriculture and the climate crisis. And it's huge. We use so many resources. There was a study done, and we waste 2/3 of our calories just putting it into animals, and we only get like 1/3 of the calories out of it because we put so many plants into feeding those animals, and we only get like a little bit out of it. If we were to eat those plants directly, we could feed so many more people. We could effectively end world hunger. We could stop wasting our resources. We could stop burning fossil fuels to, you know, grow those hundreds of thousands of pounds of crops that we grow to feed those animals. We could stop, you know, emitting so much methane. You know, cows emit methane, other farm animals emit methane. And you know, it's not something that's talked about a lot because people don't like to talk about it. They don't like to talk about their diet. People are very, very stubborn. They don't like to think that they're contributing to this. They like to think like, oh, it's just all the big corporations. And it is true. Like it's a really huge percent of global emissions come from those corporations and those companies and billionaires. But it is true that we as individuals are also contributing that through our diet and through our other lifestyle choices. So it's really important to look at, you know, what you're eating and how animal agriculture really relates to the climate crisis. And I think I kind of went all over the place there and, you know, jumped around, but I just really want to emphasize the connection between animal agriculture and the climate crisis. It is not something that is talked about a lot. There are not a lot of climate movements that talk about that, you know, and it's under talked about and it needs to be talked about more. If you want to learn more, I suggest checking out the Climate Safe movement. 0 Hour also talks about this a lot, so those two are really good. And I'll talk about organizations later. But for now, I'll be done ranting, and I'll pass it to whoever wants to talk next.
Yeah, Audrey, I think that's a great point. I think maybe something else that we might have to bring up when we talk about, you know, animal agriculture is the fact that, like, the way that a lot of, like, corporate structures exist in America, it's often just more accessible for especially low-income people to eat meat than to eat like healthier foods or to get access to vegetables. And so like ultimately this is, you know, a health issue for low income communities, just because of the way that corporations are run in this country. I personally believe that, you know, you can't really stand for any type of social justice without also standing for climate justice, you know. For instance, as someone who cares a lot about racial equity and believes that education is the most important equalizer we have, I would say, I need to understand that, you know, the number one cause of chronic school absences, for instance, is asthma, which is often caused or triggered by air pollution. And as we know, communities of color, especially Black communities, are disproportionately affected by poor air quality because America has this deeply racist history of redlining and segregation and viewing certain communities as disposable. And another example is that, possibly more topical, is that in Michigan, Black people make up 14% of the population, but 40% of the COVID-19 deaths. A main factor of that being pre-existing health conditions due to housing inequality and segregation. So to me, climate change is, you know, a public health, a social justice, and honestly, a moral issue, a moral crisis, I would say, even of our nation, that intersects with class and racial injustice a lot.
Yeah, I think Audrey and Julia made some really good points about climate change and impacts on health and how it intersects with animal agriculture as well as among other subjects. But I want to touch upon how the climate change also really intersects with our infrastructure. So at our core, our communities are, of course, rely on infrastructure, whether it be bridges or housing or even cables. So for example, the cable networks, which were built maybe like 25 years ago, weren't designed to be waterproof. And so in areas like New York, Miami, Seattle, among other areas with these large services, they're definitely